Hey everybody, welcome to Saturday Scares with Kyle. I'm your host Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com and the Kyle and Nick on Film YouTube channel that you're watching right now. Today we're going to be talking about a sequel to one of our previously covered episodes with the Return of Daimajin. This is the second in the Daimajin trilogy. As we discussed before, all three of these films were actually released in the same year, 1966. They were shot back to back. This one I think was 4 months after the previous film. And it kind of feels like something we should be talking about in relation to two franchises that are trying to do the release your films in the same year. It hasn't gone as well with The Strangers and Horizon. You know, as we talked about The Strangers, that had a first film that dropped. We know that they shot 2 and 3 back to back, and it was presumed that they would be released somewhat quickly in succession. We haven't heard much about The Strangers Chapter 2, though, since its first film didn't do great numbers and didn't do terribly well critically speaking as well. We also have Horizon, an American Saga, which is a 4-part series. The second film, I think, should be out now, at least. But it got delayed because of the first film's low performance and, again, not the best critical reviews. So let's look at a film franchise that did successfully release 3 films in the same year, and that's Return of Daimajin. This one is actually a different director from the first film. All 3 films, while having mostly the same crew, most of the same behind the scenes, did have different directors, so that each one could put a stamp on their film. The second installment is directed by Kenji Misumi, who all of you people out there who are Lone Wolf and Cub fans or Zatoichi fans can praise Kenji Misumi because he did a number of installments in both franchises. You can tell that he's at home with the battle sequences in this film because it is a much more bombastic, battle-heavy film than its more somber, smaller character count original installment. But essentially, it follows a neighboring evil lord of 2 peaceful villages, Chigusa and Nagoshi, who wants to take over those 2 peaceful villages during their festival. He drives the remaining citizens to an island that has the Daimajin statue on it, and they actually try to destroy the statue and end up awakening Daimajin, who goes out in search of vengeance for the people. I'll say this about it. It's pretty much a cut and dry remake in some ways of the original film. Not much has changed, and I can't imagine walking into a theater 4 months after the original film was released just to watch a sequel that feels kind of like the same. That's its biggest fault, is that the movie is so comparatively similar to the previous installment that I'm not really sure who it's for. Is it for people that missed the original film? I guess, because it doesn't really require the original film, but then why have Return of in the title? It almost makes, I know that's the American title, but why have that relation of the return of something if it's not necessary to see the previous installment? And if it is necessary to you as filmmakers, why is it so similar to the original? It's a big problem here with that kind of an issue. But this is a film of 2 portions, really. It's the battle story portion, and it's the destruction Majin portion. What we have here is we have a film that I think does more bombastic stuff in the first half. Like I mentioned before, Kenji Misumi is known for being very good with the visual flair of fight sequences, but in the Lone Wolf and Cub franchise, the Zatoichi franchise, you can see that's what's on display here. The previous film, there was a lot of running and hiding and kind of like, not really like a heavy emphasis on action in the first portion of the film. This one has that, although it does that to the detriment of some of its characters. Everybody's a little bit more paper thin here than they were in the previous installment. There's some likable people, including Lady Sayuri, played by Shiho Fujimura. She's the character who requests the awakening of Daimajin, and she's the one who, you can see the emotional resonance here, and I think she also keys into one of the other big similarities of the film, or not similarities, but strengths in the film, is the visual style that Misumi brings to it does have a different elemental feeling, and maybe this is just me applying my memory of the first film to what this one is, but the first Daimajin seemed very much about fire and brimstone, and a lot of Daimajin, when he's awakened, you see the flames around him, you see the heat emanating from him as a character. This one, it feels more tied to water. I mean, he does rise out of the water. There's this parting of the Red Sea-like moment from 10 Commandments where he parts the waters and walks across them. Easily the best shot of the movie. And it also feels like we see the priestess here, we see Lady Sayuri weeping so at several points, and Daimajin even has that kind of connection to her water and what she is giving for, you know, in that sacrifice in a lot of ways. She sacrifices her water, sacrifices her tears, she is willing to sacrifice her life for this creature to gain vengeance. And so what we have here is a pretty unique, elemental difference. And I'm curious to see if I notice anything like that with Wrath of Daimajin, the third film in this trilogy. But what we have here is we have a movie that didn't really get released in theaters in America. So if you're an American person, you maybe saw Return of Giant Majin, which is the Americanized version of this film that aired on TV, didn't actually get a theatrical release at all. So this movie has kind of, even more so than the original, gone under the radar. But yeah, I liked what was being done with the action heaviness at the beginning portion of the film, because it does take a long time before Daimajin wakes up. When he wakes up, I still think I prefer the original films, which has that fire brimstone. I think Daimajin is a more terrifying creature in the first film because he is so unstoppable. And even when they think that he is done, he kind of turns his sights on other people in the first film. This one, he seems a little bit more giant protector, Godzilla-like. And maybe even that has to do with the musician by Akira Ifukube, who did music for the original Godzilla. And you can hear that dun 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 dun. You can hear that kind of, but it's a bit more holistic. I feel like there's chanting going on in the background. So there's a lot of similarities in there. Overall, I think this movie is more of the same. It's hard for me to even really rank it above or below the original film, although I probably would lean a bit more towards the original. Even though I like Kenji Misumi so much, I feel like we're missing a little bit of those characters. We're missing a little bit of the uniqueness that he could have brought. He brings it visually, but I feel like he could have done maybe something more with his style to elevate what separates this film from the predecessor as well. And I also feel like it's just so bare bones the same that it's hard to even differentiate the two films once you've seen them. So it's interesting to note that these movies came out in the same year, because I would also recommend not watching them close by and separating them out by a few months, maybe even more than 4 months, which is what this one took to release to theaters. So let me know your thoughts on Return of Daimajin down below in the comments section. Is it your favorite installment, your least favorite, somewhere in between? I'd love to hear about it. Thank you so much for joining me. While you're down there commenting about your thoughts on the film, make sure you like and subscribe, and check out Kyle and Nick on Film. We have new episodes of that every single week. Thank you so much for joining me. Join us next time when we talk about the first Brazilian horror film, supposedly, when we see the introduction of Coffin Joe in At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul. Join us.